Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this September OpenChain Working Group call on the AI. On AI. We've had a bit of a summer hiatus, but it's been an open period for discussion of the SBOM guide. We're going to talk about that today. I'm going to hand over to Shane for our favorite antitrust slide. And then I'm hoping, Shane, you'd be able to just give a bit of background as well from the board meeting as well.
Right, absolutely. Right, antitrust policy notice. So this meeting, like every other meeting, is under the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. Full policy can be found on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from a member company, any questions can be asked of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. With that, I think we're ready to dive in. So a lot has been happening. The most important thing is probably that we are going to cover some news that comes directly from the board that impacts the work of this work group. Then there are specific action items for this work group to undertake with some comments. Then there's the any other business. Shall we jump straight into the news and then I hand over to you, Matthew?
Sounds great.
Right. I think it's 2 slides on, perhaps. Right. Okay, so the last work that you did together was to create the final version of the AI compliance guide for the system bill of materials management. And that guide went into a public comment period, which it completed very quickly. Now, that public comment period ended up with a few comments in, and those will have to be addressed later in the meeting. But maybe most important, when it completed the public comments, it went before the OpenChain governing board for permission to release. And that was granted. The board talked through the guide, they talked through what it means, and they gave their approval. Now, they wanted to have the release happening in October or November for 2 reasons. One, to ensure all the board members had a chance to read the completed guide, and two, to release adjacent to a large event. In October, I believe there's an AI dev event that some of the board members mentioned, and around November would take it into the open compliance period at early December in Japan. So the Open Compliance Summit. Anyway, in short, public comments went well. The board approval went well. The guide is approved, though the comments received must be addressed. And the guide will be released in October or November. Feedback from the community is most welcome. And that's it. Really, the task of this meeting is the comments. Now, I'm just going to put a link to the guide into the chat, which I've just done. And I'll throw in links to all 5 comments, no less. I'm throwing them into the chat now. Matthew, I'll leave you to it, I suppose.
Thank you, Shane. And no, Dave hasn't joined yet. I actually have them open, which is good. Here's one I prepared earlier for those of you who get that reference. Now, I will be honest, I don't really work in GitHub, so I might need some help and guidance with how we find things, but I've got the reference guide open. I've just got the 5 comments that Shane mentioned. This is one from the 25th of July. And the way I am inferring it is we just need to read the improvement and we can do the necessary updates there. I think that's how I'm interpreting it. Okay. So in section 3.6, transparency obligations, dataset lineage should not be the only consideration. Auxiliary and base models used during the development, such as foundation models, reward models for reinforcement learning, and filtering pre-processed models, also materially influence the final model's behavior and may introduce additional transparency obligations. They make reference to expected behavior, a modified version of the reference. The process shall also consider data sets lineage together with provenance, licensing, and characteristics of the base or auxiliary models and used during development or operation. These components can materially influence the behavior of the final model and may themselves introduce transparency or disclosure obligations. Maybe we go to that section 3.6. And get people's comments on it. There we go. So this is 3.6. Process shall exist for reviewing if there are any transparency obligations from regulations, including but not limited to testing, training, testing, and verification data sets, take into account the intended use of the model. Yeah. I think I can edit. Shane, are we okay to fork this?
Yes, but it might
Yeah.
be needed. So just
Yeah.
as a side note, we can look at this stuff on GitHub, but make some memos in a notepad and I can help reconcile them later.
So that just adding a comment down here at the bottom.
No, that would be good. And then I can mess with it and put it together
Okay.
later.
We don't break the system and we keep you happy, which is our main goal. Um, I joke, of course. Any comments then on this section 3.6 improvement? I think we're looking at adding sort of different ways of different models. Open it up to discussion.
This is Casey.
Hi, Casey.
Hi there. I think it's a good add. Is there an opportunity though, does it make sense to provide an example of what might be an additional transparency or disclosure obligation?
Is that a question or a
It
comment?
is. It is it's a question. It's a question. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that, but I thought maybe if we're going to consider adding this, there may be, to me, an opportunity to provide at least one or two examples of what that might be.
Other people's comments? I mean, I'm all for adding additional information if we think this is helpful and relevant, but I guess we have the opportunity to decide of whether we take this into consideration.
Could whoever's screen sharing, could you go back to the original, I think? Is this the original? No.
Yeah. Oh, the original document, yeah. So I think it's in reference to this,
Right.
and they're wanting to extend it to add more types of models.
Yeah, I think when I read the what I'll refer to as the original language, I wonder if the original is enough. Not that this isn't a good suggestion, but I feel like if any part of it is added, then some sort of an example would just be helpful for clarity. Because it's being added, in addition to what's already there. Maybe I'm just looking at it from a different perspective, but
And maybe we go back to the requester. I don't know how possible that is for them to provide said example. Is that what you're missing?
for me, yes, and that's actually um, a good suggestion to go to the person who submitted it.
Now, if I were to just write a comment in here, does anyone know if the requester gets notified of said comment?
They should, yes.
Okay. Does this make sense?
Does to me. Thank you.
Given what Shane was talking about the timelines, and we're not going to meet until the start of October, do we take a decision here to say if this person doesn't respond? I assume they're not on the call now. We close this comment and we're fine with the original wording. But if not, we take the decision to update accordingly based on their response.
Sounds good. I guess we should put a date on it of no more than a week, so that we can close this off as soon as possible. I don't mean unfairly, but I mean just to give us plenty of time to prep release.
Let's do that. Okay. Shall we move on to the next one? In section 3.8, effectively resourced requires an executive signature to ensure that the program is officially recognized in the organization to prevent executives from evading responsibility for supporting AI SBOM. Additional context, the executives hold real power within the organization. Their signature would solidify the program's legitimacy and mitigate risks of them avoiding engagement with AI SBOM. Without this requirement, there may be a risk that executives could evade responsibility. The policy would be updated to include a requirement for an executive signature. This ensures that the program is officially sanctioned and accountability is clear, reducing potential excuses for lack of support. For reference, I discussed this in ChatGPT 03, and it agreed that the suggestion is reasonable. It's proposed two potential places for the insertion of the requirement, 3.1 and 3.8. What are people's comments on this? I mean, my immediate response is, I'm happy to add it. Do all companies have executives? Do we see this being overly burdensome? Is it inferred? Is it implied? Could we go ahead, Casey?
I don't want to speak over anybody else. I don't know if anybody was chiming in, but so I get my first question is this requirement on anything else? Right. So I don't think so. So ISO 5230, I don't think that's the case even for guidance, but probably the more pressing one for me is I believe that it could trigger off like DNO type responsibility. And I think it would be a deterrent potentially to have it required versus suggested maybe as a good best practice instead of a requirement.
I'm also in agreement. I don't think this should be required because I think different companies would work in different ways. But I don't see there being a problem with saying that you could do that. Are people in agreement with that wording? Hmm.
Hi, this is Andrew Aitken. This is my first time in this group, so I'll be in listen mode most of the time.
Hey, Andrew, welcome.
Hi, thank you. But what's the revised wording? I do like the suggestion that it's a best practice rather than a requirement. That sounds more reasonable. And plus, we'd have to define what an executive is actually.
Well, I was just coming up to creating comments. Shane said he'd kindly take these comments and reword it accordingly. Maybe we can come up with the exact wording here, or we can ask Shane to wordsmith it afterwards. If you want to propose wording, then let's see. Let's propose it now. So let's go to 3.8 and let's see what it says. Here we go. Effectively resourced. So assign accountability to ensure successful execution of program tasks. Program tasks are sufficiently resourced, time is allocated, and funding is allocated. I mean, for me, I almost feel as though this is inferred. Because if we assign accountability to the task, and to my point of maybe an exec is not the right level, and an individual company can define their own accountability and who has accountability for it. Do we need a signature once it's assigned?
It's Casey. I don't feel that's the case. Could you scroll up though a little bit?
Well, this is the start of the clause. I think we can hopefully make the decision here to say that if we've assigned accountability, that should be inferred that, what do they say here? There's a signature. An executive signature. Maybe we make the decision that we don't need to add to this comment unless this person is on the call. Do we feel an executive signature?
If I may, it sounds
Gotcha.
descriptive to request an executive signature when internal company policy could have delegated parties to do this.
Indeed.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe in the verification material, document the names of persons, functions involved. Could we have in here something like, where appropriate, document accountable person? Because if we are saying identify an accountable person, then we can document who that accountable person is.
I actually thought the language should cover that as is, in that, someone has been identified as responsible. Maybe it's implicit that that was documented. Maybe identify and document.
Okay. I think we're all saying here that we believe that we feel as though it's sufficient already. So maybe we can remove this comment.
Yes, I mean, I would be astonished if an executive in a company with 100,000 people had to sign off.
Yeah.
But at the same token, it's really just about having someone accountable inside the legal entity, and then the whole entity has accountability in its trail.
Mm. Are we okay with this? We believe that this is already covered in the wording already with the identification of an accountable person, exec or otherwise. Now, Shane, I note I can't close this, so are you able to?
Let me have a quick look at the screen. Could you?
It doesn't have to be now, of course. I know it's very late for you.
Sure. But can you just show me where you can't close it?
Down at the bottom, it said close issue. You do not have permission to
Oh,
close this
right.
issue.
But you can comment. So
I've commented, then that's
that's
fine.
That's fine.
It might be because I'm just using my personal GitHub account. Okay, moving
Yeah,
on, if that's
Matthew,
okay. Go ahead.
do you want to add the document requirement to that identification? So you've identified a responsible person. You want to document it so that
I think
outside
we've got
parties.
that here.
Okay.
The verification materials of this, and I think Shane just noted that I'd missed it. Document with the names of persons in the program roles identified. I think the original proposal was, do we add an extra line to identify the accountable person? But one could infer that you document the accountable person here, because in the program role, the accountability lies with them. Are you okay with that, Chris?
Well, inferring can be kind of nebulous when it's done differently in other organizations, and you're the Joe that's out there that needs the SBOM, and you don't know who to contact, who's responsible for it.
But are we saying here that we have the flexibility in the guidelines that anybody can infer it for their specific organization? To Shane's point, a company with 100,000 people, they're not going to get an exec to sign it off. And
Well, I don't think that needs necessarily to be an exec, but it needs to be somebody who has some authority in that role over whether or not.
I think that's the point. Assign accountability and then document the name of that person in the role in the program. So in the list of people in a program role, the accountable person will sit at the top and you'd name that person and it's documented. I think the discussion point is, do we call out explicitly, document the names of persons in the program roles, including the accountable person? It's whether we added words like that.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. And maybe this is another point that at some point in the future, once we've got this reference guide agreed and signed off, we then start providing more educational material, more examples, and that may be where we flesh this out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for your comment. The third of 5, describe the improvement. In section 2.5, it is stated a set of open source software licenses identified as a result of following an appropriate method of identifying open source components from which the supplied software is comprised. It should be more general, not only restricting and open source, most of the current AI systems models are not, I assume, conformant to the definition of open source. My proposal is a set of licenses identified as a result of the following an appropriate method of identifying components which the supplied software is comprised. If this guide only focuses on open source AI systems, its reach will be very limited. Let's address that point before we come on to the second. For those of you who've been on this journey for the last 18 months with this guide, we've gone back and forth on whether we capture open source or proprietary. And we were a little bit concerned to include proprietary explicitly in there because it just opens up more, I guess, questions. But I actually do like this proposal of making it more generic because it could be inferred that it's open source or proprietary. I'd like to put that on the table for discussion and see what people think.
This is Casey again. My initial reaction is I like it. I think it's a good call out. I would separately like to take a look at it. Unfortunately, I have to drop for another call, but I'll rejoin in about 35 minutes if everyone's still on. So, but thank you.
Thanks, Casey. Appreciate that. Chris, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I agree. It should be more general because you have to have the commercial licenses in there as well, because you need to know if you can or do agree to be compliant with those licensing.
Great. Now, I will note that the board, and I don't know, is Shane still online? The board, about 2 board meetings ago, did want us to focus on open source rather than proprietary models, but I don't feel that goes against the will of the board because here we're talking about the licenses for the components of the model rather than the actual model. And if anything, it doesn't call out explicitly proprietary, it just genericizes it a little more. So I believe this is still within the scope of what we have approval from the board to do.
Correct. It should be within scope because it's perfectly valid to identify any license and determine whether it falls in the team's wheelhouse or not. And they can always kick it to another team if there's a different service license agreement team. Oh, Chris, over to you.
No, I totally agree with you. You have to look at the commercial licenses within an open source model because most of the models today are generally contain a great deal of open source, but they're not entirely open source. And if you can't agree to the licensing that is provided for the commercial source, then you need to decide you're not going to use that model. So I think it would be appropriate to include it.
Right, I think we can make a decision here that we are comfortable with that. The second one, it's along the same lines, isn't it? Section 2.6 should be more generic. I prefer the wording an organization's license compliance activities rather than an organization open source license compliance activities. I will just go to section 2.6 to ensure we're not taking this out of context. But I think given our previous conversation just then on this point, I think we're probably comfortable to define it. And I think I'm in agreement because that's just a definition of program. So in the absence of hearing any comments, I think we're both fine with the approval of 2.5 and 2.6, the suggested approvals, word changes. No, I notice Oliver's made a comment. Oh, he's just changed the name of the title. That's fine. Great. Okay. Any other comments on that one before we move on? Hearing none, let's move on to the next one. Another one from Oliver. This is section 2.8. Is this guide only focusing on supplied software? What about if the software repository, the AI system are only made available, e.g. as part of the SaaS offering? Does this guide not apply? It should be clearly stated which scenario this guide covers, only distribution or also making available. So we just changed the title there. Let's go to 2.8. Supplied software. I mean, I think the scope of this guide could expand. I don't necessarily see it explicitly for sort of software. There may be other offerings like SaaS offerings. What are people's thoughts here again? Do you think we need to update the wording, or are we comfortable with what we have and then expanding as necessary later on?
I agree with your suggestion that it be expanded a little bit to include software as a service.
So do we just, for simplicity, do we just amend software that an organization distributes to third parties?
What about just
Mm,
doing software that organization provides to third parties or makes available?
Let's do that.
Does this include compiled software?
Does this include compiled software? I don't think I'm qualified enough to answer that.
So if someone's providing software as a service and they're using substantial amount of third party, both open source and commercial and proprietary, does this include third party software? Essentially.
Yes, I think it is.
Okay. Makes sense.
Andrew, what was your comment? Yeah, sorry, your proposed wording. Software that an organization not distributes. Yeah, use a different verb.
Either provides or makes available.
Thank you. Comment cannot be empty, is it? Okay. Right, our fifth and final one. This is the shortest one. In the bullet point list about program participants, legal is missing in my opinion. Okay. Here we go. So in 2.7, an organization, employer, contractor that defines contributions is a responsibility for preparing supplied software. Do we want to include legal? Contributes to or has responsibility for preparing supplied software?
Maybe
Uh,
if you were to add the words preparing, reviewing, approving, and preparing, or something along those lines, then you wouldn't have to necessarily name legal, because then you got other organizations that have contracts requirements and so forth and so on. So
my other concern that's just come to me now is these definitions came from ISO 5230. Is that something we also need to consider? And that's a question again for Shane, so we're consistent throughout.
Ideally, we'd like to stick with the same text if possible, but we're about to enter an edit cycle for the ISO standards. Chris on the line, Chris Wood is the chair of SPEC, Lockheed Martin. So what I suggest is try to keep the language for now, but make a memo of the suggested change, and then we'll kick it to SPEC and see whether SPEC is interested in doing the change in the ISO standards as well, or rules it incorrect.
Thanks, Shane. I guess that infers then that the last two here changes to 2.8 and this one 2.5. We should run and 6. We should run through the spec group before actually changing.
Yes, if it's taking the exact language, it would be best to keep in sync with the spec group.
Who's taking the action then to go to the spec group?
Well, formally speaking, Chris is on the line, so if you put the comment on GitHub and make a note it should go to spec, then I'll pick it up and throw it in the slides for the next meeting.
Thank you so much, Shane. I think you may have walked into that one. That was my hope.
I'm not very bright.
yeah, me either.
Oh, you undersell yourself, guys.
I should have had a alias in there. Interested listener.
So, apologies, was it Chris, your suggestion, or was it Andrew? Any organization, employee, contractor that defines, contributes to, or has responsibility for preparing, reviewing, or approving supplied software. Note, depending on the organization, this may include. Did we want to include legal then in that list? Because legal can now be in that list if we've added these verbs. They're not verbs.
Yeah, I think that would probably be appropriate. You agree, Shane?
Absolutely. Let's throw it in there for discussion.
Are we okay with just legal or licensing or compliance? Any of the departments we wish, or should we just leave it with legal?
I think legal can delegate as needed.
Wonderful. Okay.
Mary's not on the line, is she?
I don't think so. Mary hasn't taken a job.
Chris was just suggesting we're going to offload more tasks. No, she's not, but we'll catch her later.
I think when you come to in these processes from a specification standpoint, legal is really the final word as to whether or not the license compliance is correct in a lot of organizations, if not most of them. So I think that if legal is in there and legal says yes, it's good, then it's already been through the whole compliance department. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, it does. So we have reached the end of those 5 comments. Did we have anything else on Shane's slides? Any other business? Before we go to any other business, does anyone have any comments about those 5?
No comments.
So just in summary, we had one slide we've asked for somebody to provide some examples. If we don't hear from them in a week, we can close that comment. We had one where we didn't agree with the person and decided to not make any proposal changes. And then for the last three, these are changes for the definitions of some of the defined terms that Shane / Chris / the specification group will review at the next meeting. And where's the feedback loop into this guide here to say, yes, we can accept it? I guess it's Shane, because you're going to do the modifications accordingly.
Yep. I'll work with Chris and the team, and I'll swing back for the next meeting.
Great, thank you very much. We then move to any other business.
Looking good.
Is it worth me mentioning, Shane, about the House of Lords?
Yes. Yes, why not?
For those of you who don't know, I went to a House of Lords in the UK, it's the UK's upper house of Parliament, to discuss a variety of open source topics, and bumped into a Lord called Lord Clement Jones, who has been responsible for a lot of the legislation or discussions around AI legislation for Parliament. I happened to mention the concept of OpenChain to him. He liked this idea of sort of experts in the industry defining guidelines and rules, and then legislators adopting it, rather than it be the other way around. And he's invited myself and Jimmy, who's our chair, along to discuss this further, of which I plan to talk about sort of OpenChain, the history of OpenChain, how we got to ISO 5230, and then also touch on this guidelines as well. So hopefully we can get him made aware of what OpenChain is and all the good work that we do here. And that is happening in a couple of weeks' time, so I'm sure I can provide an update as necessary for the next meeting.
Very nice work. Thank you.
Well, a big thank you to everyone. I'm merely just the spokesperson. Any other business?
So, Matthew, this is Andrew again. I almost hate to take us back to the document that we were going through, the reference. The one clause that was where the definition was changed from open source license compliance to license compliance. So, and I think, Shane, this is probably for you to comment. If you look at the definition of OpenChain, it's supply chain where open source is delivered with trusted and consistent process management. And throughout the material that describes OpenChain, it talks about open source. So if this definition is broadened within this document, and I have no problem with that, but I'm just saying that this is a little bit different than what OpenChain has defined as its core mission before. So will the board have an issue with that?
It's a very good question, Andrew. I think the answer is that there's no intent for OpenChain to move outside its scope, but this would be a case of capturing which licenses are identified. So I think that in this particular case, it's identification rather than OpenChain presuming to dictate how people would deal with their proprietary licenses. So I think this should not be a problem for the board. I mean, if they did provide negative feedback on it, of course, we'd want to look into it. But because it's simply a request to identify licenses, it does seem harmless enough to me in terms of our scope of operations Where we would action recommendations is on the open side of things. Because as you said, that's our scope, that's our project charter.
Mhm. So in this context, the BOM would provide a documentation of all licenses, but if there were needed recommendations around the open source licenses or compliance, then OpenChain would make those recommendations.
We
Is that
don't
what you're
actually make recommendations on the licenses, so it would really be up to the company to say,
Mhm.
here's what we want to do. In our case, we might provide referenced material and case studies.
Yeah.
That would always be on the open side.
Yeah, I mischaracterized that. That's what I meant.
Yeah, no, it's quite correct. So yeah, we would essentially operationalize on the open part of it, but there's no harm in telling people to list licenses, especially given how fuzzy AI is right now with OpenIsh and OpenKinda and maybe Open.
Hmm. Well, and the BOM would be really, really incomplete if it didn't include that all license.
Well, absolutely. In that case, it would
Yeah.
be a problematic document for legal certainty.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
No, thanks for the great input. I mean, it's always important for us to recenter on the core mission like this and to look at what stays in our wheelhouse and what might need to be sent to another's.
So Shane, can you just walk us through the final time, the timelines?
Yep,
Because we've got that October deadline. We've
right.
got a spec group discussion. We need to finalize some things.
I mean, ideally, we should finish this offline this month.
Yeah,
And next meeting should be looking at the final one in its production ready state and signing off on the PR and things, which I'll prepare.
thank you. And Shane, I will be in California at the time of that conference. Whether I know Jimmy has mentioned, and I spoke with him earlier, I will see whether I can help out in any way.
Absolutely. Well, you know, the door is always open if you can make it to Japan. So Open Compliance Summit, I think it's first week or two of December. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for their time, all their contributions. Really appreciate it. I think Shane's explained everything that will happen in the next month.
Right. Well,
Have a good rest of your day.
take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.